Now we've been noticing this for a while, since the Charlie Kirk shooting that they actually called an assassination, but actually it was a political unaliving, political unaliving. They may call it murder, you know, a public shooting. They call it an assassination, which, like I said before, it's a curious term. That's a whole other subject matter there. Some others have touched on that particular issue, but I don't think quite effectively, But anyway, just the basic point, because we were thinking about this for a while about fascism. They're saying fascist, they're saying, Donald Trump, the president, you know, he's a fascist and is fascism. I know this is a big confusion about really what is or was and therefore is fascism and Nazism or Nazism, and often these two terms are confused. And I don't know if it's an American thing, because of media and TV shows and how certain ideas are popularized. You remember that show Hogan's Heroes? Yeah, Hogan's Heroes. I don't know. This is probably somewhat dated for many of the not just the millennials, but what they call them, the Gen Z and the kind of alpha beta that's rising up, the alpha beta generation, But anyway, there's a big confusion about fascism. I've been listening to a lot of different, commentaries and kind of reports and updates about since the Charlie Kirk unaliving. I actually, and this is not to be funny or anything, but I call him Captain Kirk because it's like people are being beamed up. There's something very kind of Star Trekky going on. I was just hearing what's his name, Elon Musk. I think in the UK he was streaming something and he was being asked questions and a big crowd and everything like that. And he was mentioning about how he envisions the future. They can just get a handle on the political chaos. There's a lot of political chaos. This is a very, very interesting situation. And, since the 400-year, prophecy thing and the proper interpretation, from Genesis chapter 15, what we see is that nation, the Anglo-American hegemony, the Anglo-American supremacy. When I say supremacy, I'm saying based on the geopolitical, since England ruled 3/4 of this, earthly plane, this world, right? And then we have the daughter, of Babylon, or the daughter of baby London, we have America, and there's that whole Anglo-American link right there. So therefore, look for the connection. They're strengthening this connection, and it was interesting seeing Elon Musk, on the UK side, and also what's going on in the UK. So the brothers and sisters in the UK, of course, be safe everywhere. But let's touch on the main subject matter here concerning fascism. I've noticed that a lot of people are confused about what fascism is. I'm hearing people say this one's a fascist, that one's a fascist, this is fascism, that's fascism, and then they slip in the Nazism, and they say it's fascist Nazi. I said, well, hold for a moment. Did I get this wrong, or have they gotten it wrong? Is this part of the miseducation in America? They talk about the educational system and what's so wrong about education, particularly in America, although there's more opportunity for it. It's like the old saying, you can take a horse to the water, but you can't make it think. You could give somebody a book or send them to school, but you can't make them think. So the question is, what is fascism, right? And the question mark concerning Trump. Is Trump a fascist? Now, most folks will say, yeah, he's a fascist because you have been Lucifer affected. Check out the video that we did about the Lucifer effect. We was actually going to touch on that even with this most recent incident. We've been seeing certain signs. It's kind of very interesting. We just released that one right there, and boom, we see what has happened and what is still kind of developing. But this point is about what is fascism. You see, Benito Mussolini, he is the modern, we can say, proponent he is the first one to rise up this fascist idea. And fascism is directly connected with Benito Mussolini, right? Benito Mussolini, you remember Benito Mussolini? You see, often we see Hitler and Mussolini together, right? We see Hitler and Mussolini together. And there's often the confusion about really who's who, who's who. Benito Mussolini, fascism, Adolf Hitler, National Socialism, aka Nazism. All right, but they just throw both of this into a pot, like a melting pot. They stir it up, and they pour you a cup, and you're drinking this fascist Nazi confusion, right? And what is fascism? Right? Benito Mussolini, he is the one who started out the fascism, like in the modern times. Benito Mussolini, right? And it's almost like when they talk about the Mandela effect, like you thought something was a certain way, but then as you check it out on social media, on the internet, it's actually different than what you originally thought it was. You know what I'm saying? It's far different than what you thought it was. Yeah, it's a trick. It's a trick. It's a trick. So the point here is that it's Mussolini and fascism. It's not Adolf Hitler and fascism. All right? Although they both are considered fascists, but here's where the lines really get blurred, and here's where the Babylon, here's where the confusion comes about. Right? Because it is Benito Mussolini and fascism. It is Adolf Hitler and Nazism. All right. So what's the real difference? So first of all, let's get to what is fascism. What is fascism? So one is a fascist, one is a Nazi, right? Fascism started independently of Nazism, but because they both found that they had a common cause, they kind of joined up together. And in fact, it's a little bit like what we have with Kirk, Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes. Even though they really, in a sense, I'm not gonna say they don't like each other, they didn't like each other, but there's big differences. Right, to the uninformed or uninitiated, if they want to call it that, they may seem to all be the same thing from a certain kind of faux woke, liberalistic, I have to say dumbed down black perspective, because there's a lot of black people out there that are running this so-called liberal agenda. This liberal agenda, these liberal talking points. I think it's from the so-called liberal talking points that they have confused these terms, as they have done so many other things. It's like, well, who shot Charlie Kirk and why? What was the real reason? Have you heard some of the different interesting rumors? Now, they all can't be true. They all can't be true. Like, Nazism and fascism can't be the same thing. Why? Because there is Nazism and there is fascism, so they cannot be the same thing. All right? They cannot. They just cannot. All right? So what's what? Let's look at this right here for a moment. Let's zoom this up right here, okay? Here we have two quotes. I wasn't going to get into this, but I think it's necessary too. So on fascism, this is what Benito Mussolini was said to have said concerning fascism. Like I said, fascism, right, in modern times emanates or originates with Benito Mussolini. All right. And Nazism, it emanates or originates with Adolf Hitler. These are two different, even if they're on the so-called bad or evil side, it's not the same thing. You know what I'm saying? In other words, like the devil is not Beelzebub and Asmodeus, you know what I'm saying? But they all are demons, they all are demons, but they're not the same demon. You see what I'm saying? So here, Benito Mussolini says, race, he asks the question, race? It is a feeling, not a reality, according to Benito Mussolini. 95% at least. Nothing will ever make me believe that biologically pure races can be shown to exist today. This is what Benito Mussolini said, while he went on a fascist, anti-Christian crusade. Get this here. He went on a fascist anti-Christian crusade against one of the oldest Christian nations, right, in the world, right, going all the way back to the Bible times, New Testament, Old Testament, and we're speaking about the fascist invasion of Ethiopia. But the more and more you hear people talk about this one is a fascist, that's one of the fascists, this is fascism, that is they never, ever, ever mention, Benito Mussolini. Have you noticed that? Never. They always go to Hitler, right? Well, Benito Mussolini said, national pride has no need of the delirium of race. See, Benito Mussolini was all about this national pride thing. This is part of the fascism. Fascism has to do with the fascide. The fascide is like a bundle of sticks tied together. And this is what connects it very deeply, to ancient Rome, to Rome, and on a certain level to a certain radical form of Roman Catholicism, right? A certain radical form of Roman Catholicism, right? We're not saying Roman Catholic as a Christian, but we're talking about this political, world dominating ideology. This is why we talk about the fascist anti-Christian crusade against Ethiopia. But fascism, this is just a point about fascism by Benito Mussolini, right? When he's speaking about race. So he says it's not about race, according to Benito Mussolini, it's about national pride. Make America great again. Now, if we're speaking in that context, what's right and exact, but notice they never really make that connection, because if they make a connection with Trump and Benito Mussolini, right, along so-called the fascist argument side, then people are going to begin to say, well, what did Benito Mussolini do? What did he do, right? Well, what he did was a fascist invasion of Ethiopia, and that would then put Ethiopia and black people, front and center. That's why they don't do that. That's why they use the word they use the word fascism like bait, like the worm, like worm, like bait. They put the fascism out there like bait, and then they reel you in to the so-called Nazism, the Nazi. Adolf Hitler. Now, what did Adolf Hitler say? Right? And what's the difference between his neo-socialism or national socialism? Socialism. Ain't that something? Many of the liberals who are proposing this whole Nazi thing, they are in fact Nazis. Let's go into what Hitler says here. The greatest revolution which National Socialism has brought about is that it has rent asunder the veil which hid from us the knowledge that all human failures and mistakes are due to the conditions of the time and therefore can be remedied. But that there is one error which cannot be remedied once men have made it, namely the failure to recognize the importance of conserving the blood and race free from intermixture, and thereby the racial aspect and character which are God's gift and God's handiwork, end quote. Now that right there is the words of Adolf Hitler. So we see that with Benito Mussolini, it was about this national pride, with the fascide, the bundle of sticks, the particular symbology, right? So let's look at the fascist symbology. What is its meaning? And the fact that the modern founder of fascism, right, which is not being mentioned in the social media rhetoric. Very rarely you really have Benito Mussolini mentioned. Right? And Benito Mussolini is squarely the fascist, you know what I mean? And Adolf Hitler is squarely the Nazi, right? So Adolf Hitler was talking about race. He's saying that, things and failures and mistakes, often can be remedied. But once you make certain kind of failures, like with mixing your blood, mixing your seed, mixing your race, that cannot be remedied. That is 180 degrees opposite of what Benito Mussolini's fascism and what fascism properly is. All right. First things first. All right, so right here, what is fascism? So let's get to the founder, the modern founder, right? The modern founder. although there's a philosopher that precedes Benito Mussolini, Benito Mussolini, especially after the Lateran Treaty. So for all the people that talk about they're Christians and they're pro-Christ and Christian and this is their moral, well, what they need to do is to talk about the Lateran Treaty, right? The Lateran Treaty is very significant, where the deadly wound of the beast was healed, right? The deadly wound of the beast, right? This is all history, and I know a lot of people don't know history, and this is why things are bound to go from bad to worse, right? But here, history examples, right? Let's give a historical example here. Benito Mussolini, 1883 to 1945. Now notice that when 1945 occurs, this is when America, away from its isolationism, its historical isolation, it was in the policy of isolationism, just focusing on America. But then because its mother England got caught up, in what was going on in Europe, and when Hitler and the Nazis were bombing London and everything, and England was about to fall, basically their children who broke away from them in the War of Independence, the Revolutionary War of Independence. You remember when America, broke away from England? They now came to England's rescue. That's why they always speak about the British, the English, the Anglo-Americans, the British and the Americans always speak about our special relationship. They call it our special relationship. So 1945, when Benito Mussolini effectively bit the dust, when his own people killed him and his his woman, his bitch, his woman, whatever, when they killed both of them, right? This is when America now joins the war. So this is when the American popular consciousness, the only ones who were concerned about Italy invading Ethiopia, right, was actually, we could say, those few good people around the world, and particularly black peoples who were even concerned about that because they understood the big picture. So it's very interesting that back then, when you had a lot of black people who are not so-called highly educated or educated as they are today, they understood, right, what was significant, and they also was on the right side, as we would say, the right side of history as well, right? But let's get into this here. This is still about the point, right? What is fascism, right? Now, notice what we didn't do is what we often do. We go to the meaning of words first, the etymology of words. Hopefully we'll get there. But fascism has to do with the fascide. It has to do with a bundle of sticks. In fact, let me just show you this right here. Okay, so fascism, the ism, schism, fascism. This is the fascide. A fascide, this is an ancient Roman symbol, right? Basically to rally the forces. All of us are like sticks, a bundle of sticks. You tie them together, and so you tie together a bundle of sticks, and then you put an axe head. So that means all of us together, do this, right? It's a very interesting political philosophy, and it's very ancient too as well, what Benito Mussolini, in a sense, revived and resurrected, because he was seeking to make Italy and seeking to make the Roman Empire great again. This is what This is what Benito Mussolini was about. So on that level, taking the truth, some real points can be made. But you see, they can't talk about Trump and Mussolini too much, because after a while, somebody's going to make the ultimate connection, right, between what the first fascists, the first political fascists on the world stage who really gave the world a good demonstration of what fascism did, right? So see, this is circa 1423. These are fascists. They call fascists, like different forms of fascists, fascides and fascists, where they take a bundle of sticks, right, and they're bound together, and then at the top of it they put an axe head. It's like all of us are it's like uniting together, right, to become a weapon, right, against whoever is the targeted enemy. Right? And in the case of Benito Mussolini, it was we black people of the world, but particularly, right, we black people, or Ethiopia, because what Ethiopia represented, both in the ancient Christian sense, Judeo-Christian. So you hear a lot of folks talk about Judeo-Christianity and the Jews and Judeo-Christianity, these values. But see, here is why they do the three-card Monty politically, right? With, oh, he's a fascist and a Nazi and a fascist, and the Nazis were fascists and fascists were Nazis. You see how they confuse you? Right? And this is coming mostly and mainly from the so-called liberal, the pseudo-liberal side, right? They're the ones who are pushing this rhetoric out there and saying, oh, Trump is a fascist. Oh my God, these are fascists. Oh my, they're like Hitler, so forth and so on. But they are mixing up, right? They're really mixing. This is the Lucifer effect, right? We talk about the Lucifer effect. This is what the Lucifer effect is all about. Check out that other video that we did, Lucifer effect. Do your own research. Philip on the Zimbardo, his research is right and accurate, and there's something going on with the psyche, not just of Americans, right, but through this whole social media thing, right? So here, a global history of Rome's most potent political symbol. So you see at the bottom right here where it says a global history. We talk about globalism, right? Right. So fascism. So they're now, it's like pinning the tail on the donkey, right? So to speak. Though the donkey is the symbol of the Democrat and the elephant is the symbol of the Republican. But this is what they call like pinning the tail on the donkey. A global history of Rome's most potent political symbol. Why is this Rome's? Now when we talk about Rome, right, think about what I'm saying. Rome, that's why we say the fascist invasion of Ethiopia, right, was a fascist anti-Christian crusade. It was aimed at reviving, making Rome, the Roman Empire, great again, because Benito Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty, right? The deadly wound of the beast was healed. Look it up. It's 1929 Lateran Treaty. Go look it up, research it, find out more about yourself, more about it for yourself. You know what I'm saying? And share it with others. This is very important because even though they try to fool you with pseudo history in the media and they try to Lucifer affect you, the truth is still the truth. The truth is the truth, right? So they might use the lies, right? But the truth will prevail. The truth crushed to the ground will rise again, right? So this is the fascide right here, a bundle of sticks tied together with an axe head. Bundle of sticks tied together with an axe head. This is also another symbol of the fascide. What's interesting is that in some, I don't know if it's still there in D.C., I think it's in Congress or in one of the government buildings in the District of Columbia, but they have a symbol of a fascide. I remember seeing it in some of the old Jordan Maxwell films and everything, right? He kind of made a little point about it, but really he didn't go deep enough, Jordan Maxwell. But he did show this in some early on. Maybe you've seen it before, but I think it's still out there. We got to do a little research and see whether it's still there, the fascide within one of the government, I think the Senate, the House, or I think it's in the Senate. And it's right there, like on the wall. It's a part of the decoration. They have a fascide right there, right? Which is kind of interesting. But of course, America, like most of the Western Gentile world, it basically harks back to the time of the Greco-Roman. So the Greek and the Roman, the Greco-Roman, that is the Western Gentile, we say roots, that's their great history, so to speak. So here we have the Italian Fascists, right? Italian Fascists. So here you can see it kind of very clearly right here, the bundle of sticks, right? The bundle of sticks, and at the top right there, the axe head. What you think the axe head is? What you think the symbol of the bundle of sticks are, right? Politically. What can this mean, right? What can this mean right here, right? So here, let's get to the root idea of fascism, right? And then we'll connect, the first, when I say successful, Mussolini was successful because he actually brought these ideas into, we could say, political, real world effect with significant consequence, especially against many of those Judeo-Christian, those black people, who was martyred, who was killed, who was unalived, in Ethiopia. And this is where we have the weapons of mass destruction too. the use of like WMDs, right? Talking about back then, going back to 1936. This is the half of the story most people don't know. That's why they try to stick the tail, the fascist tail, on Hitler and then try to mix it up between like fascism and Nazism is the same thing. It's not the same thing. Just because it's similar does not mean it's the same. In fact, see, you have to have understanding to understand that something that is similar to something else is not the same thing. So here we have fasces. In Latin, it's a bundle of rods. I say sticks, but rods, right? A bundle of rods containing an axe with the blade projecting. So it's a bundle of rods, like we all are rods, we all bind together, we're separate, so we all get bound up together. And then we have an axe, we all share this one axe, right, with the blade projecting and projecting on those that we're gonna cut, we're gonna chop down, right? Fascio. So here we have fascio. Fascio in Italian is a word based on the root idea that means a group, an association, a bundle. Right? A bundle. They come in a posse, they come in a gang, they come in a bundle, right? Now here we get to 1919, right? Partitio, nazionale fascista. Here we have, excuse me, my Italian right there, but this in Italian is what the fascist party. This was the Italian name, partitio, partitio nazionale, right? Fascista, which was the name for their party, their movement. Like they say today, they say the GOP, or the Dems, the Democrats, like the political parties. Yeah. So here, that led now to 1921 and fascist. Right? And here's where we have fascists, right? And this whole philosophy and the ism to it is what we have as fascism, right? So here is going to the roots. I would think that this is what they would teach ones when they go to school and colleges, since even the unaliving, the shooting, right, or what's called we call it a pseudo assassination, because by ascribing as assassination, this was a private citizen that yes had a big and a major effect on political things, but they was not a elected politician, right? So be that as it may. And for ones and ones, we feel similarly, about when they speak about Malcolm X, they talk about assassination. So there are some civilians, we see a kind of he's like the white Malcolm X in a sense, Charlie Kirk. So we're putting in some of our other points about, the social issue that's going on right now, right? But these two are often confused. Even when we look at them, they both are wearing a sort of military kind of khaki or military kind of uniform, but you can see their symbology is different, right? Their symbology is different. There's a lot of different. They're similar, but they're not the same. They're not the same person, right? And they don't represent the same, political agenda. Their political philosophy, their political agenda is not and was not the same thing, right? And it's very dangerous, the confusion of these two ideas in social media and in the world today and in the politics that's going on today, and how one so easily, right, say this one is a fascist and this one's a Nazi. And these are supposed to be educated, individuals, fascism. Now, we have the modern definition, because most people, when they look up certain things, they'll go to like, oh, let's go to Merriam-Webster and it's looking up, right? And sometimes these definitions have been twisted, have been tweaked, right? Some of them have been watered down, right? And a lot of these dictionaries today, right, are part of the confusion of the terminology today. These dictionaries represent how they want to make you believe, what they want to make you believe. A lot of these definitions are about make-believe. So it touches a little bit on the truth, but it basically it's like you throw the stone and you hide your hand. Now, for example, let's use this right here, fascism, right? How is fascism defined here, right? A system of government where everyone agrees with the leader. Because disagreeing would be, quote, inconvenient. Would be inconvenient. Now, most people would agree with this, right? They say this is fascism. That's why we say that Trump, and that's why fascism is why the Nazis are fascists, right? But this is not a true definition right here, right? You know what I mean? This is not a definition, right? It's like not an interpretation. It's an interpolation. Right, this right here is the make believe. You know, you can put this on a T-shirt, and people, you know, man, you know what I'm saying? You know, hint, hint, hint. Right, but let's go over here. Definition of fascism. Right, definition of fascism. Notice if you scan through this right here, just scan through it right here. Just scan through it. Do you see any mention of Benito Mussolini? Do you see any mention of the Partitio Nazionale Fascista? You don't see no mention of Benito Mussolini or what he did, right? And he is the first fascist. And here's where more confusion comes in. They'll put a title right here and they'll say, what is fascism? And who's the first person you see right there? You see Adolf Hitler. And oh, Adolf Hitler is a Nazi. And he's fascism. He's fascist. Right, and then they'll say, well, a nationalist political ideology. There's a lot of it. I mean, the liberals have a national political ideology. You know, about what they want for America. You know what I mean? It's a single party dictatorship. I mean, we don't really have that here. There's the liberals, there's the Democrats, the Republican. Democracy is condemned. Actually, Trump was democratically elected. You know what I mean? Whether you agree, whether you voted or whatever, right? It's still just because you don't like a decision doesn't mean that something wasn't decided, even wasn't properly or fairly decided. You know what I'm saying? You know, sore loser. You got a lot of sore losers. You know what I'm saying? On that level. You know, that kind of look at reality and say, I don't like reality, and then try to reinvent reality to feel better about it. But you can't change reality like that. You can only make yourself, you can only Lucifer affect yourself, right? Or Lucifer defect yourself. Combination of pro-capitalist and left-wing ideology. This is interesting. You notice what it says right there? A combination of pro-capitalist. Based on this definition, therefore, Trump is not the only fascist. Right? A lot of the liberals and the faux woke folk, you know, they also represent a lot of fascism according to its true definition. Right? According to its true definition. An enemy or oppressor is created. An enemy or oppressor is created, you know, or you have to have a target, right? The leader has total power, a dictator. Even in America, right, the leader, whether he is Democrat or whether he's Republican, whether he was Trump or whether he's Biden or Obama, does not have total power. Does not have total power. Many politicians or many elected leaders, presidents wanted to do things, right? And very few were really successful in doing even half, less the all or most of what they sought to do. You know what I mean? So the leader has total power, right? A dictator, right? And see, this is the next thing. People don't really do enough study to really understand. Maybe it's black and white. They don't want to look at black and white. They want to see everything is color and HD. But you really need to study, right, before you ascribe or be ascribed these ideas, right? It's almost like when we talk about Satan deceived the whole world. This deception is so thick. Right, you know, Lucifer, the satanic deception, you know, the Lucifer effect. The leader is charismatic. Well, many leaders are charismatic. If we just say, well, a leader being charismatic, one could say Obama was charismatic. Does that make him a fascist? Right? Trump is charismatic, a fascist. Now Biden was not as charismatic, so to speak. But does that mean he's not, or he was not a fascist? Right? Dissension, this is the key part. Dissension is not tolerated. I mean, they blocked President Trump's his social media accounts. Look at that. right? How much total power did he have? And had his Twitter. Remember when it was Twitter or X? He had his various accounts when he was putting out tweets even as president and so forth and so on. They blocked Facebook. All of that was blocked until he, I don't know if Elon Musk or others created their own, you could say social media app and outlet where they can, twit and tweet and all of that, right? But what I'm saying right here is, you see on the fascism, it said dissension is not tolerated. Do we still have dissent? Is there still dissent? Now I want to say, well, look what they did to Charlie. Right, well, Uncle Charlie, you know what I'm saying? What they did to him, yeah, that's a whole other issue. We got something for that, but we have to address the so-called elephant in the room, right? What is fascism? Now, notice in all these definitions, right, nothing is mentioned about Mussolini. Nothing is mentioned about Mussolini. Gave us and gave the world the best example of fascism. Yet they might throw his name out there, but they don't say, well, yeah, he was fascist, and to how can we say, and to not manifest, but to affirm or to bolster his ideology, to show and prove. This is why he invaded. This is why he invaded. We could even say grape, right? He invaded Ethiopia, right? But notice all of this. Even when we look at this, a political ideology characterized by dictatorial power, extreme nationalism, and suppression of individual freedoms. Do Americans still have individual freedoms? Right? Do Americans still have individual freedom? Are they not free to do what they individually want to do? I mean, especially if it's within, so-called law and order. You know what I mean? Don't they still have freedom? There's all sort of things going on in America that would really barely be tolerated, in many, 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 and so many other places around the world. Yet America's fascist because of Trump. Right? Because Trump is in the presidency, therefore it's a fascism. This shows that people don't even know the meaning of words, right? And this is very, very dangerous. This is very dangerous, right? Where they are taking something that is true historically and twisting it up in order to make like a gotcha moment, like, a point today, right? Fascism, right? This is what fascism, right, was all about. Fascism was against the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Yeah.
Lion of Judah society.
And against black people, right? But moreover against Judeo-Christian people, right? Sought to wipe out and sought to exterminate a whole. This is where the whole word genocide actually comes from, right? Did you know that? It's because of what happened to Ethiopia during real fascism that the terminology genocide was coined. Because of what Haile Selassie said to the League of Nations, the League of Gentiles, of Heathen, the League of Nations. What was said there? They sought to exterminate a whole race. Even though Mussolini said it was about national pride, had nothing to do with race. You see, while Hitler, on the other hand, he said, well, race, and racial mixing and those things right there was a very grave mistake, and these mistakes could not be remedied. So they had a totally different agenda. Were they rulers that ruled or sought to rule in absolute ways? Yes. You see what I'm saying? There was no really democracy, right, in Italy. There was no real democracy, right, in Germany. So yes, they voted, but it should not be confused with America, right? And we're talking about two different countries, right? We're talking about two different countries. We're talking about Italy, and we're talking about Germany. And we're talking about two different systems of government. Looking at fascism and Nazism is almost like looking at democracy. Get what I'm saying? Looking at democracy, right, and republicanism, right? You know what I mean? Now, they're not the same thing, but they're like two wings of one bird, but it's not the same wing. right? Not the same wing, right? Right? And there were many who were protesting what was going on, right? I mean, talking about Americans, even white Americans and others, they were aware, right, of the murders that was going on by fascist troops. You see what it says? By fascist troops in Addis Ababa. So it's kind of interesting that they use this term. I think it's something about just saying fascist. They like to say fascist. It's like an F word, I think there's something about saying fascist, like an F word, that many people like to, stop the wanton murders, right? Fascist revolution, also the indoctrination of the youths. This is another and now when we say fascism in this way, we start to look at the liberal agenda, the democratic agenda, how they've been indoctrinating youths, you know what I mean? Indoctrinating youth, we can get into that, even with the LGBTQ XYZ, and that kind of also links to the most recent thing that's going on, the indoctrination of youth, right? Mussolini becomes dictator. He brings economy under the state, right? Economy under the state, right? Control under state control, maintains capitalism. Is it because Trump seeks to bolster capitalism and focus on the economy? Is this a reason why ones are saying he is fascist? Well, if they make the point about what Mussolini was seeking to do in this way, and they make this, but then pause for a moment. What president of the United States, to what president of the United States that the economy is not important? He glorifies the state at the expense of the individual. Is this what Trump, the Republicans, or now I know folks will say, I'm on the side of the Republicans, I'm on the side of Trump. No. We're looking at what is said and we're examining what is said, right? In fact, we should be on neither side, as the people. We should be on the side on the issues. See, what people do is it's like a team. America loves sports. You know what I mean? They love sport, you know what I mean? And games. They love sports and games and love, okay, I'm on this team, I'm on that team, which is also actually a part of the whole Lucifer effect. So when we talk about fascism, the rise of dictators, right? Look at this right here. Let's just zoom up here, right here. Rise of dictators. Mussolini and fascist Italy. Let's begin there. Why begin there? Because it begins there, right? World history. This is grades 8 to 12, right? In grades 8 to 12, one should have actually learned about this. So when they use fascism so loosely, one should say, no, that's not so, right? I mean, even well, we don't know what they're teaching children today. I mean, the education system is so messed up. And as proof the education system is so messed up is, the fact that, fascism, this term has been misapplied. The confusion, right? USA, America's fascist and Nazi confusion, right? The confusion of terms, right? Of who's who, right? But it's really because they try to avoid what was what. They try to avoid history, right? Mussolini explains fascism. If you go a little bit deeper, right, in the interwar years, primary resources, if you go a little deeper, Mussolini actually breaks down and explains point by point what fascism is. Just like Adolf Hitler explains what his National Socialism. So think about it for a moment. What's the biggest kind of discussions about socialism and socialistic policies, right? Mussolini, some moments before being shot, right, in Bologna, right, we call his Bologna, right, in 1926, right, in 1926, but that before some moments. So this cannot be true right here. You see, this is why it's important to understand history. We'll see a picture and we say, yeah, this looks good, but then we examine it and say, it doesn't, right? There's books. Mussolini and the Rise of Fascism. Because fascism is connected with Mussolini, right? And Mussolini, right, and Italy and Rome is connected with the fascist invasion of Ethiopia, right? Right? The half of the story that was not told and is not told. Even in Eritrea, You see what they did with Eritrea? We also see what the fascism did in conscripting children into their war machine. It kind of reminds me of what we see in the Middle East, so-called Middle East over there, where we see little children running around. They're proud to put guns and everything in little children's hand, and even to send little children into war. And then they'll say, "Oh, you're killing children." But they are actually training their children to be killers and sending their children out to war and to fight. So what do you do in such a situation? You know what I mean? Do you bomb them with little toys or something like that? What do you do? Right? This is what they did in Eritrea, right? So we look at Ethiopia, right? The half of the story. They don't want to touch on Ethiopia for nothing. They don't want to say about the fascism. This is more like white supremacy, so-called, right? They use these terms. I'm talking about even the liberals use these terms. Black people, get off of the democratic plantation, right? Because they were the same Dixiecrats, right? Okay, so here, war, right? Here, let's look at this right here. War, right? 2 towns in Ethiopia are bombed. WMDs. So before the WMDs of today, there was a WMDs. What is it that ain't nothing new under the sun, right? Italian planes spread death in sudden attack. And what's so interesting that this was going on, this was being news, and beside, those few, we would say maybe good, people of different races and even some white people and many, many black people were aware of this. This is what's so interesting. We look at it today. They didn't have social media. They didn't have all these outlets, and therefore they were not confused. They were able to see the straight news reports, and they were able to understand it clearly. They were not confused with all these different itching ears, these different talkers in their head. Now, Italian soldiers on their way to Eritrea. Now, this is why the whole politics between Eritrea and Ethiopia is so messed up today. If the truth be told. Benito Mussolini, he invades Ethiopia from Eritrea, right? 275,000, some say K, right? Ethiopians are killed. Some say it was actually more than that, but this is maybe a conservative estimate. 2,000 Italian troops killed. Now, notice, when we said Ethiopians, we're not talking about soldiers, we're talking about men, women, and children. Men, women, and children. Italy also invades Eritrea, Libya, and Albania, right? Also the Libya connection with Italy and Mussolini and his fascism, and the context even of Gaddafi, who many ones and ones see as a hero, but that's a whole other matter right there, right? When Italian invaders attacked Ethiopia, the African nation was rocked, but they refused to let colonizers take over the land they called home. Here's how the Ethiopian Empire, the empire of the conquering line of the tribe of Judah, Haile Selassie I, King of Kings of Ethiopia, elect of God, bounced back from white tyranny, right? That's why they don't really make the full connection. They'll throw out the fascist talking point. Oh, he's a fascist. This is a fascist. That's a fascist. Oh, fascism, Nazism. Then they'll segue Nazism, right? Because if we get into it, the victims, right, of this fascism, of real world fascism, were black people, right? Were black people, right? And they also use, right, or misuse religion. Right? Because remember, Benito Mussolini was a Roman Catholic, and he played an integral part in helping to restore power to the Roman Catholic Church, and particularly to the pontiff, to the Pope. That's why they call it the Lateran Treaty. The deadly wound of the beast was healed. Right? And this is some of the news stories from then. Defend Ethiopia against Italian fascism. Right? Italian forces in another attack, right? Here we have His Imperial Majesty on the front lines. Women and children die. Haile Selassie seizes a machine gun and fires on enemy planes. There's actual video where he downs a plane, right? Red Cross tent, it was set on fire. I mean, the fascist Italian soldiers, Benito Mussolini's Vaticanian soldiers, they even bombed Red Cross centers. They bombed and killed women and children and old people and non-combatant. I mean, it's just innocent people. Just people, but nobody talks about that. Why? Because black people cannot be innocent people, huh? War begins in Ethiopia. Italy attacks tribesmen. Look at that. Italy attacks tribesmen. And also how they use and manipulated, certain Islamic, right, against the Christians, even though Italy was Christian, but because Ethiopia's Christianity did not bow to the Pope, right? That's what we call it, the Italian or the fascist anti-Christian crusade. The anti-Christian fascist crusade may be a better name for it right there. But just to give you a little bit of a history perspective. And how does it affect us as black people? Well, black Americans in Harlem volunteering to go to Ethiopia and fight to save Africa's last uncolonized nation. And a nation that has a treasure, right? Because of that connection to the Bible, that connection to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, all of that to save Africa's last uncolonized nation from fascist Italian dictator Mussolini. Almost all volunteers, almost all, were blocked from leaving the U.S. by the U.S. government. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? It's like right now, if something's going on in the state of Israel and say Jews want to go there to support it, or other groups, in the old country or the country where they have family or they come from, they are often allowed to go there, but black people were not allowed to support, right, who they wanted to support, right, to show how the fix was in. So when we talk about fascism, when we talk about us as black people, what is our real interest, right, as black people in the so-called Democratic Party, right? And what would be our interest even in the Republican Party, huh? Candace Owens, right? See, this is the half of the story that if ones like her really start to really talk about this and put it together, right, they might, Charlie Kirker. You know what I mean? And who is they? Well, that remains to be seen, right? We don't want to, put our finger on the scale right there, right? So here, right? Just to point to this to show a little bit of the history, the history, when black people fought back, right? When black people, they always want you to be in the victim mode. They want black folks to be in the victim mode. We were victimized. That's why they always talk about, Black Wall Street and, a couple of the, one or two places, you know what I'm saying? But they don't talk about the other, places where we were victims, but they don't talk about places where we fought back, right? Have you noticed that with black folks, and concerning black people, and it almost is on either or side of it, whether the Democrats, especially the Democrats, the Democrats, but also on the side of the Republican as well, right? Even though, right, if we speak fairly, the Republican side probably more likely, right? Because there are certain, amongst those who truly do hold to certain Judeo-Christian values, there are certain Judeo-Christian values, but if they hold to certain white and racial supremacy ideas, they probably will hold to the Roman Catholic and the Vaticanian and the fascists, right? Right? So here's what the battle was between when we talk about fascism. We talk about Benito Mussolini. And this is one of the reasons why they don't focus much on Benito Mussolini or put Benito Mussolini into context. Let people know, well, who was Benito Mussolini? How was he the first fascist? Right? And how he went against, right, the anointed king upon the throne of David, the conquering line of the tribe of Judah, Haile Selassie I. How did he do that? How did he go against an ancient Judeo-Christian nation? Right? So we had Benito Mussolini, right, an avowed Roman Catholic. Lateran Treaty just tells you everything. Most folks that probably listen to this might not even know about the Lateran Treaty. Pauses and look up the Lateran Treaty and continue, right? So you really can appreciate and appreciate of what's being said right here. right? You know, when we're speaking about Haile Selassie the First, right, and what was done against him. You see what I'm saying? Because many ones think it's just about the Jamaican Rastas or these Rastas, or those, about reggae or smoking marijuana. No, there's deeper, right? There's deeper, right, faith-based issues here. Right? There's deeper morality here. There's genuine morality that's at stake right here. Right? This time it's for Africa. Right? You know, this time it's for Africa. The first Italo-Ethiopian war. The second Italo-Ethiopian war is what we're talking about for Benito Mussolini. Right? So they tried it once, they failed. Right? And what he tried is to force Ethiopia, right? To force Ethiopia to convert to Roman Catholicism. That's what was behind the whole thing, right? But here's the good news, right? The half of the story that, you know, even the faux woke, the pseudo woke folk, you know what I mean? It's about Black Lives Matter, but when do they talk about Black Americans fighting for freedom in Ethiopia, right? Against, right, the world's first fascist, right? Benito Mussolini, right? Rare clips as African Americans volunteered to fight alongside fellow Ethiopians against what? Against fascist Mussolini, right? You know, that's why they're very cautious when you talk about fascism. Notice right after they say fascism, they always show you a picture, or they'll say Adolf Hitler, fascist Hitler, fascist Hitler, fascist Hitler, but not Mussolini. Why? This is the half of the story. Mussolini invasion of Ethiopia 1935. Right, 1935. How Black Americans, right? How Black Americans fought, right, against the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. But it wasn't just Italian, right? Because to the Italians' credit, right, when they woke up from the spell, they did what was right. You know, they got Mussolini, you know, out the way. You know what I mean? You know, and we need to applaud them on that. You know, when the Italians woke up, you know, those Italians that were duped, you know, about making Rome great again and the Roman glory on that. When they finally woke up, you know what I mean? They did what they had to do, and we just need to thank them for that. You know what I mean? That's a whole separate video. Don't want to get flagged by showing those pictures, but you can look up what happened to Mussolini, you know, and his woman and his bitch. You know, what happened? His bitch, you know, female dog. He was a dog and she was a dog. You know, because he was such a clown, right? You had to be a dog. But Black Americans, they got up, get up, stand up and fight, you know, get up, you know, you know, stand up and fight, right? And they fought against fascism. So Black Americans, our ancestors, Black Americans, right, knew about fascism. And here's a shame that many ones and ones Black people that talking about, oh, so-and-so the fascists, this is the fascist, this is fascism, don't even really recognize, right, what our ancestors knew what fascism was, right? And what they're talking about fascism now is not really what fascism really was or what fascism is, right? What they're doing and they're seeking to do is to Lucifer affect you, right? You know, social media is a prime place where people are being Lucifer affected and Lucifer affected, right? And also where, you know, they're deceiving the whole world. You know, there's a lot of deception, right? And deception about real things that really matter. Fascism in Africa, right? Talk about fascism. The first place on the face of the planet Earth where we get an example of fascism is in Africa, right? And the occupation, right? 1936 to 1941, right? Italy attack on Ethiopia. The final failure of the League of Nations. It's like the United Nations today. What's going on? What's going on? The United Nations. Before the United Gentiles, United Nations, it was the League of Nations, and they failed, right? Hitler, Mussolini, he aligned with Hitler, right? Right? Later on, right? For support. But it is fascism and Mussolini where it begins, right? And even here, and this is a still from video, you see how they have the fast side. You see how the fast side right there, right? The fast side, right? Because this is the root, right, of fascism, right? This is the root of fascism right there, right? Take a screenshot of that. 1914, 1915, right? Talking about history, right? And he said, if we don't learn from the lessons of history, we're bound to repeat, right? Isn't that what's said? If we don't learn from history, right? Learn the lesson of history, are we not bound to repeat it? Right? So we had Mussolini, fascist Italy, right? The Eritrean colonial Moors, with the red fezzes and all this garbage. Ally of Italy, they were the allies. So they even had black people, right, enlisted, right, to fight and to kill, right, and genocide other black people. This is the very interesting thing, right? Ethiopia invaded by fascist Mussolini, Italy, right? So what they're trying to do is trying to give you a false fascism and not tell you about true fascism. Because to tell you about true fascism is to open the whole half of the story that we haven't been told, right? And once that is on, right, then as what happened then affected the whole world, right? What is about to happen now, if people wake up, would actually affect, the whole world in the future, right? And they can't jeopardize it, like what they said, the fix is in, right? And the fix is in, right? The fix is in, right? So here is it, right? They say Italian, right? Right? And yes, it was fascist Italy, right? But it was really fascism, right? It's really the fascism invasion, right, of Ethiopia, right? The fascism invasion of Ethiopia, right? Here it goes. Mad Monarchist is a we like to cite there. Check out Mad Monarchist. Mad Monarchist site out there on the internets, right? Right? Italo-Ethiopian War 1935. And what were the Italians doing all the way over in Ethiopia? What right did they have to do there? They were on, right, a crusade, an anti-Christ, a fascist anti-Christ crusade, right, against the Ethiopians, right? Fascist anti-Christ crusade, right, against the Ethiopians. So the ideas of what fascism is has been woefully, right, woefully distorted. These kind of pictures they want to show us what's wrong showing this. Because remember what even happened to black soldiers. Black soldiers fought, bravely and valiantly, in all the wars, but many times after they fought, gave their service for victory, they were martyred, they were lynched, they were crucified, they were killed, right? And people say, oh, we just talking about race and racism. It's not all about that. Oh, that's the past. You need to forget the past. Well, don't have no Memorial Day in America. Don't remember your past. Everyone else remembers their past, their history, the good times and also sometimes the bad times, because that's a part of life, right? Remembering what we went through, how we overcome, you know what I mean? Where our failures, where our strength was. It's the reality of life, right? Here we go, right? Young Ethiopian young patriots. These are the half of the story that they don't want to tell us about, right? Oh, black men riding horses, youths riding horses. Oh my God, are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel? Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Right? Don't want us to see any proud pictures. Right? Don't want us to see us in order where we're defending ourselves. Right? Oh, the white man did this, the white man did that. Well, yeah, they did do things, but we also did things for ourselves. You know what I mean? We also did things for ourselves, and we give thanks for the support from other good people. Whether they were black, whether they were white, but if they were good people, if they had some moral value. Here they like to say a lot the Italian invasion, but it was the fascist invasion, right? Because these Italians were fascist. They were fascist, right? Defend Ethiopia. See, this banner has it correct. Defend Ethiopia against what? Italian fascism, right? The Italian fascism. But the Italian fascism, this brings us all the way over here again, right? to a history example. The first fascist movement to gain power was Mussolini's black shirts in Italy in 1922. Let's bring that up right there. There we go. Was Benito Mussolini's black shirts in Italy in 1922. Fascisms. See, they don't have no problem calling them black shirts. They call them black shirts, black shirts. But they had a problem with black people. You see what I'm saying? They had a problem with sovereign, independent, moral, Judeo-Christian black people. That's what they had a problem with. Right? Fascism's most infamous manifestation, they say, was under Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany. A regime marked by, they say, anti-Semitism, racial doctrines, and the horrors of the Holocaust. Now, based on what we know about true history, okay, we understand that, definitely. But notice what they do. They totally sidestep what was done against the Ethiopians, right? They totally sidestep that, right? The Ethiopians were a Semitic people. We're talking about the Haile Selassie, the conquering line, the tribe of Judah. We're not saying all Ethiopians. Among those Ethiopians are Shemitic Ethiopians, the kings of Ethiopia of Shem. That's the covenant of guess right there, right? If you don't know that, then you get to know that, right? The problem is that many careless Ethiopians are not defending, are not defending the truth anymore. You know what I mean? They've been lulled into the lullaby, all right? Bella Danissimo, Bella Danissimo, Bella Danissimo, right? Adolf Hitler and Nazi, what is it? The regime was marked by anti-Semitism. Wasn't, you see, anti-Semitism, if we take these terms and put them in the right context, then what Benito Mussolini did against the Ethiopians was anti-Semitic. Who was he going against? The Lion of the tribe of Judah. We're not saying, it didn't say the Lion of the tribe of Judaism, it's saying the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Check. Racial doctrines. There was the racial doctrines as well, racist doctrines. And also the horrors, well, not of the Nazi Holocaust, but we just showed you 200, we say 60 million. We don't know about those numbers there, but we know about the weapons of mass destruction and the fact that the word genocide was coined because of what Haile Selassie said in Amharic. The translator was trying to translate this and basically translate it literally, the extermination of a seed, the extermination of a race, and therefore genocide. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it was the Rastafari Haile Selassie the first, right there. Then it said other examples. So what they did was take see, Mussolini was not ultimately successful, right? He was not ultimately successful with his attempt. Although what he did was very deadly, right? And many innocent people, men, women, and especially women and children were murdered, were unalived. You know what I mean? Was, in a sense, Holocaust, not the Nazis. See, Holocaust, we have to pause because the education deficit of our, not just our people, but people in general, right? And then they get offended, usually because of their stupidity and their ignorance. People will get offended, right? Because the truth is an offense, right? But it's not a sin, right? Other examples include, Francisco Franco, his Spain, which some historians view as semi-fascist. Look what it said, as what, semi-fascist. But notice the first fascist, right, was Benito Mussolini. These historical instances help us to understand the devastating impact of fascist ideologies. But notice something right here. They don't say nothing about Ethiopia. Have you noticed that? Right? The real world, real history shows that the demonstration of Benito Mussolini's fascism, right, against another people who were Semitically identified was against the children of the Ethiopians, was against Ethiopia, was against the Lion of Judah. Yes.
Lion of Judah society.
You see what I'm saying? So the first fascist movement to gain power, they just go to when the fascist movement gained power, but they don't go into what Benito Mussolini did. right, to those victims, to the black victims, right, the black victims of Benito Mussolini, right, fascism's black victims, right, the black victims, right, of fascism. Maybe we need to go with that right there, the black victims of fascism. What you think about that? So here, examples of fascism. Whenever Hitler is mentioned, Nazi Germany, they always mention the anti-Semitism. They mention the European Jews, the Holocaust, what was done right there, and that's facts. We get it. But when they mention fascism, fascism's founder, modern fascism founder, is Benito Mussolini, right? Fascism is not fascism without Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini basically sets a template, right? And then they include like, okay, Nazis, and then they call Francesco, however, Franco, Spain, they say, well, he was semi, right? They say he was semi, and they say, look at these three here. These like they try to say like Revelation, the three dirty like filthy frogs and everything. Revelation, right? And right here, enemy ears are listening. They're listening. Hopefully, they are listening, right? But are they learning? Now, notice right here. This is another fake meme right here. With fascism, they give an example of Nazi Germany. Why don't fascism they give an example of the fascist invasion, right? Invasion of Ethiopia, right? Why don't they put that example right there? Because it's not just so-called fascism, or even not just anti-Semitism. Because going against Haile Selassie and Haile Selassie Ethiopia was anti-Semitic, right? Because the Kebra says the kings of Ethiopia of Shem, and this is the whole connection scripturally, biblically, historically, over 3,000 years of history, right? So right there they say the militarism, right? Military parades, military indoctrination, authoritarian dictatorship, right? One charismatic leader, that was Benito Mussolini, right? That projects strength and exalts nationalism. Because remember, Mussolini's main aim was to restore glory to the Roman Empire. Mussolini wanted to revive the Roman Empire. Can you imagine? Right? The people that crucified Christ, that crucified the Messiah, right? That came from the tribe of Judah, right? Get what we're saying here. See, our people back then, they understood it. They didn't have all the distraction and deception. They were able to get it. People nowadays, with all the information, like what's that, information overload, right? And the scapegoat, right? The scapegoat was who? Right? The scapegoat here was using, notice what fascism does. But see, they're giving us an example here of Nazi Germany. We need to redo this meme right here, right? And we say to the Habarim and those who have the skills, the scapegoat, right, was the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The scapegoat was, right, the children of the Ethiopians, as Amos 9:7 says, are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel? Right, so using a group, right, or a race, use the Ethiopians, the race, and black people to blame problems on. Ain't nothing new under the sun. Right? Ain't nothing new under the sun. So the political philosophy, right, that exalts nation and often race above the individual and is led by an authoritarian government, and they bundle all their rods together with an axe head, right? And then they attack the enemy. So what is fascism? Now notice they always like to use, as I got to keep saying this, they always like to use Mussolini, right? And instead of using Mussolini, they like to use Hitler, right? They like to actually ignore Mussolini, right? Why? Because, see, to zoom in on Mussolini and put Mussolini in the true light, yes, Hitler and his Nazis and what he did to the Jews and the anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, yes. But what about the same things, right, in essence, right, beforehand? In other words, if they responded to Haile Selassie, right, the line of the tribe of Judah, his appeal, right, if they responded to the just cause there, then what happened in Nazi Germany would not have happened. Right? See what I'm trying to say? So when it happens to black folks and black people, they ignore, they turn the deaf ear. They're not hearing, they can't hear, they don't understand, right? Fascism is an authoritarian and nationalistic political ideology focused on dictatorial power, suppression of opposition, and the elevation of the individual above the elevation of the nation above individual rights. Trying to get to this point, brothers and sisters. I know this has been a rather long video right here, but it's necessary. If you got to this particular point in the video, give thanks. Please like it, and share it as well. Like and share this particular video right here, because it's not the information you're going to get on these other YouTube channels. They're not going to even, most of them don't even understand, they don't understand what just happened last year, right? Or the last 5-10 years, much less, historically, these main issues. The real players understand that. That's why they're twisting it up, and this is why we're trying to unravel and show you, what they're trying to cover up, the half of the story. So who is it that suppresses opposition, right? Opposition, right? Who suppresses opposition more? We find that it's the Democrats, right? It's the Dixiecrats, It's the so-called liberal that suppress opposition more. You know what I'm saying? Even on YouTube and on some of social media, some things that we say, if we just speak the truth and it's not what the liberal agenda is about, right? They will suppress it, right? And this is the promotion of centralized control, right? Some things you put up on, I know people who be posting on, Facebook, right? And sometimes they will get sat down. Like a few ones say that they would get sat down, or they can't post for days or a week or something like that, and they'll say, oh, you posted something, and they'll look at what they posted. There was no racism, no nothing, but because it goes outside of their control, right? So in social media, what people don't understand is that there's a social media fascism. The fascism of social media. You know what I'm saying? The fascism of social media, right? And the promotion of a centralized control. They say, well, don't say murder, say unalive. You can't say kill. You can't say this word. You can't say that word. These are just words. These are just words. You remember when the whole pestilence was going on? Right, the so-called COVID thing was going on back in, years in 2020. You couldn't say that. If you say that, your video gonna be flagged. You know what I'm saying? Militarism, right? And often they say racial purity, or we say racialist, racist and racialist ideas. And this leads once again to these two individuals, right? Two individuals, that got in bed together, but they wasn't really in bed. They were like on, they were sitting on the bed together. They were not really in bed together. Talking about Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, right? So Benito Mussolini, he is covered, right? And it's an important reason, right, that goes into, the fascist, anti-Christian, crusade, right, that he conducted against Ethiopia. That's what it was. The fascist invasion was a anti-Christian crusade against Ethiopia, right, as well as against black people, right? And once again, here's where we had began, right? And this is what people need to understand, right? Fascism, right, versus Nazism is similar, but it's not the same, right? It's similar, but it's not the same. Similar, but not the same. And so here, just a little bit more, we have to give you more right here for those who want more, right? Who can take, the truth, right? Some people, they can't take the truth, So, this is not a video for them, but for ones and ones, if you're at this particular point, this is like a little appendix here, right? The term totalitarianismo, totalitarismo. Totalitarismo was first employed by the, quote, philosopher of fascism, right? Giovanni Gentile. Notice his name, Giovanni Gentile, right? Trying to zoom in on that. Giovanni Gentile in 1875 to 1944, and Benito Mussolini. This is our point right here. Benito Mussolini, 1883, 1945, in mid-20th century, fascist Italy. It was originally intended to convey the comforting sense of an, quote, all-embracing total state. An all-embracing. That's the symbol that we showed a little earlier, the symbol of the fascist symbol, right? All-embracing, right? Total state. But it soon attracted critical connotations, right? Critical connotations and unflattering comparisons with what? With liberalism and democracy. Get that right there. See our point about liberalism and democracy? So liberalism and democracy uses this term fascist and fascism against their so-called political enemies, you know, but it uses these terms out of context when actually they are the totalitarismo, right? They are the fascists. They're the ones who seek this, even when we're talking about fascism, social media fascism in social media, right? Fascism in social media, right? And we've seen it, you know, and it goes on. It's something that does go on. And the real connections really have to do with, let's go over here, Nazi versus fascist. It's not the same thing. These are some of our main points. Just to go over this again. Nazism, and fascism is not the same thing, right? But they try to make it the same thing, right? Nazism is considered to be one form of fascism. This is what it's considered to be, right? Very inconsiderately, right? Though both Nazism and fascism reject the ideologies of liberalism, Marxism, and democracy. These two are different in many aspects. Let's zoom in on this. These two are different in many aspects, right? Nationalism and fascism have their origin in the 20th century. Another key point, we're in the 21st century technically now, right? 21st century. But they have their origins in the 20th century. While fascism was in vogue between 1919 and 1945. Why was fascism in vogue between 1919 and 1945? Because 1945, that's when Mussolini got killed. That's when his whole thing, basically, he failed, right? Ultimately failed, right? But he failed with a blood trail, right? A blood trail of black, right, and brown bodies, right? Black and brown Shemitic people, right? The Ethiopians, right? Of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? Nazism, right? It became popular from 1933 to 1945. Now, here's the key thing that many ones miss, and we didn't want to miss this, so we put this here as a part of the appendix here, that fascists, right, believe in corporatism, right? That's where the whole symbol of the rods all bundled together with the axe head projecting, outwardly, right? Corporatism. You know, I heard Jason Black say that the Charlie Kirk, he was like a white supremacist Silicon Valley startup, right? Actually, you know, and it's a good perspective. Check out, you know, the Black Authority there, you know, on some of what he's putting out on this most recent, we could say, this most recent subject matter. You know what I'm saying? Of all elements in society to form an organic state. They were not racial and had no strong opinion of any race, the fascists. See, the fascism, right? See, there's a twofold what Mussolini was about. We'll probably break that down in another video, but this is just to distinguish fascism from Nazism, right? And the main differences between, right? There are differences between fascism and Nazism, right? Area of difference, differentiation is source of origin. Fascism, Benito Mussolini. Nazism, right? Adolf Hitler, he started Nazism. The area of practice, it was mainly in Italy, right? The area of practice of Nazism, it was mainly practiced in Germany, right? The breakup strikes recruited thousands of black shirts to break up the strikes, right? Break up the strike. So they were against the what we would call it. It was against the locals. You know how they have locals. You know, like there's these locals, and a lot of these politics is kind of interesting because we do face these things even today when we understand. You know, the strikes. You know, I mean, even on a certain level, Ronald Reagan had certain fascist, ideology that he affected. Remember what happened with the strikes and I think it was the air. What was that called? The people who worked in the airlines, the whole airline strikes, if you recall that back in the days, right? Nazism, on the other hand, the breakup strikes organized an army called gangs, right? So we talk about gang banging. The Nazis were gangs, right? And they were like real gangs that really gang banged, right? Called gangs of Nazis, and they were called the brown shirts. So look at this right here, right? We speak about the black and the brown people. The fascists had the black shirts, and the Nazis had the brown shirts, right? Their belief. What was their belief? The fascism believed in corporatization of all elements to form an organic state, while the Nazis, right, were more focused on racism, right, and on racial issues. The doctrine believed in superiority. We could call it a type of white supremacy, right? This is what the Nazism represented. Class system. The fascists believed in class system to preserve it for a better social order. So when people start talking about this class and classism and classes, that it actually lends to the fascist ideas and ideals. While Nazism believed the class-based system to be a hindrance. So we can see fundamentally Nazism and fascism is different, right? The origin of the name. Fascism was originated, right, from the Italian word fascismo, right? Fascismo, right? While Nazism, it originated concerning National Socialist German Workers' Party, the workers, right? Okay, so right there, fascism, right? Nazism, right? Similar, they have certain similarities, but they are different, right? Notice how they have the colors, the Nazi colors, right, are on the side of fascism, right, and the alignment, and the fascist or Italian colors are on the side of Nazism, right, based on this meme. So we have fascism, we have Nazism, right? Even the symbology, right? But here, lastly but not leastly, fascism is the open terroristic dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. Finance capital, right? That's why Jason Black's and the Black Authorities assertion, that the Charlie Kirk was actually like a startup, a Silicon Valley startup, right? That promoted the elements of, for lack of a better word, white supremacy. Right now, this is not popular with a lot of ones who are doing the crying game. The crying game is going on right now, and that's quite understandable. But it's very important for us to use this opportunity to make sure that our logistics, our logic, the facts, are right and accurate, right? And we approve of this video. Wow.
Lion of Judah Society.